I'm Jennifer Goodman. I'm the director of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. Thank you for joining us today. We're tackling a challenging topic today. We're calling it unloading surplus properties, which can mean different things to different people, but we feel like it's a critical issue when you look around the state at vulnerable property types. A lot of properties fit into this category. Properties owned by well-meaning historical societies, schools, churches, other community groups that have properties that need a new life and probably a new owner. So that's what we're going to tackle today. This is part of the Preservation Alliance's ongoing efforts to provide education, practical strategies to people like you throughout the state to save and revive more special places and build the preservation movement. So here we are today, just a couple of housekeeping things. As you can see, we are recording this session. There's folks that I know can't make it today and others, and we'll use it over time, sharing this information to other groups around the state. We're gonna introduce our great panel of people that are associated with different kinds of successful stories of unloading surplus properties in the right way, in a way that's very preservation friendly and good for their communities. They're each gonna tell their short story, 3 different ones, different kinds of properties, different kinds of issues, introduce themselves, introduce their project. And then I suggest after that, you go to speaker mode. You'll be able to see the different speakers. I'm gonna ask some questions just to get the thought process going. And then we'd love to hear from attendees with your general or specific questions. My colleague Andrew Cushing is here, that many of you know from his work with community projects around the state. He's going to jump in now and then and also watch the chat or invite you to make some live comments or live suggestions later in the program, and we'll try to wrap up in just an hour. So here we go. Ready to go? And please mute yourselves. Maybe I didn't say that. Mute yourselves if you haven't yet. So for our wonderful panel, first up is 2 individuals associated with this interesting project in Windham. Betty, do you want to introduce yourself and go first?
Sure. I am Betty Dunn. I am I guess what is relevant and helpful to this is that I'm a former selectman and a retired attorney, which is part of this skill set that I brought to the beginning of this project. The Campbell Farm, the picture that you see on the left is the house as it looked in about 2014 when the town bought the Campbell Farm. The picture on the bottom that you see is some of the farmland there. So the town of Windham, after several years of negotiating and trying, bought this property from the Campbell family. It had been in the Campbell family, we believe, since a king's grant. This is not the original home that was there. This is a replacement home that was built in, Tom's going to know the
1868.
1868 to replace a pretty traditional farmhouse. There had been also, until the late 80s, there had been a beautiful multi-story barn out behind, but it had gradually deteriorated and been taken down. The interesting thing for these purposes is that the town bought this property not for the house. Didn't want the house really, but the house was on one of the last pieces of acreage that is open fields and forest in the town, and wanted to preserve the open space. And along with the open space came the house. So once we bought the property, and the money for the purchase, $860,000, came from the conservation funds from current use land transfer tax. So the town didn't have to pay, it was bonded, but the payments on the bond were paid and have been completely paid through the transfer tax. Once the town owned the property, then the question was, what happens to the house? And the Conservation Commission was in charge of it. They didn't have any clue. So they asked for a committee that was set up of people with various interests, historic as well as conservation, as well as just town administration, to figure out what we would do with the house. And just the house, because the land was going to stay and is staying just open land. The hayfields are mowed, the forest is the forest. And so this committee was formed, and I ended up being the chair of it. And the first thing that we did was have some open house tours. We had some listening sessions. We had very, very useful, contacted the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, and through them gotten Steve Bedard and others down there to do a historic analysis of the house, so that we would know what was worth preserving and what was not. The house, although the exterior looks pretty good in the photo you see of the house on the left, the interior had been renovated and re-upped actually multiple times through the years. The Campbells had had various family and then families and apartments within the house. And then the last remaining Campbell that had lived there had done renovations in the 80s with some aluminum windows in the back and the proverbial olive colored oven in the kitchen. And so it in terms of historic preservation, it was certainly not pristine. So what could we do with it? We had people talk about making it into a museum, but we already have a town museum, which is difficult to maintain, and the town pays for it, but town didn't want to pay for another museum. People wanted to have it be a rec center for teens. Oh my gosh, how long would any historic stuff last if we did that? And also the town didn't want to spend any money on it. So what would we do? We came to the conclusion that we would put out an RFP for proposals for a long-term lease with historic preservation requirement in it. We put that out, and we had a deadline, and we got back people that had no clue whatsoever what they were doing, and or wanted to do things like make a museum, or with no ways to fund it, or one person who wanted to do a bird sanctuary. And we were somewhat despairing, and the date for the response to the RFPs had closed when suddenly I got a phone call from Tom Paquette, who you see here on the screen, who said, "Am I too late? Am I too late? Can I please put in an RFP?" And we said, yes. So we opened up the window for the RFP again, and we started negotiating with Tom about what would work. He was the first person that we had that had a background in historic preservation and was serious and had experience and that could do this. And we went through a significant long period of negotiations, not because we were at odds in the negotiation, but it evolved and where we were headed to. And we also had to get over some hurdles, because in order for the town to give a lease of more than 1 year, that has to go before town meeting, and it has to be on the warrant, has to be voted in the affirmative, which it did. And then Tom's financial model, in order to get the funds for it, required that the house be made into a duplex, which technically isn't an allowed use.
And I'm gonna say stop and let's leave a cliffhanger for what happens next. And Tom, it's
Okay.
gonna kill you, but you're gonna have to hold on. And we're gonna talk more about what happened in the conversation as we get to sort of what the strategies are and what tools do different successful entities like you do to pull it off. So let me just go through the rest of the slides. Everybody hold the top right image in your head as Tom's work in progress, still in progress. And I'm gonna go to the next. So we have 3 little stories to share. Great
Okay.
success story with Campbell Farm that you'll hear more about soon. I'm going to introduce Steve Bedard to talk a little bit about what's gone on at Strawbery Banke. I think a lot of you in the Zoom probably know of this very successful heritage house program that the museum started over 10 years ago now. The museum way back in urban renewal was a really early user of easements as a way to protect properties without owning them outright. And in this more modern innovation, starting over 10 years ago, they've now, with over 10 of their properties on their big campus in Portsmouth, they've come up with creative ways that balance commitment to preservation and stewardship, restoring the buildings that were sort of under-restored and needed investment with leases and a good business model way to keep them thriving. And in a lot of these buildings, there's still museum space on the first floor, and there's additional paid leasing going on upstairs. But Steve's going to talk a little bit about, add to that, Steve, and talk a little bit about your specific project, please, within that Strawbery Banke portfolio. I think a really good story for historical societies to hear.
So Jennifer's point about the 10 buildings, there were 10 buildings that Strawbery Banke really hadn't done much to, except keep a roof on since they acquired them during urban renewal. Conant House was one of them, 61 Washington Street. I was given a portfolio of 10 houses from Rodney at Strawbery Banke, Rodney Rowland, and we were working on a house up the street, and said, would you be interested in doing one of these? I said, absolutely not. And then he said, well, go through and look through. Of course, we found one we thought about doing, and of course, it was the worst one, I think, of all of the 10. And it was going to be basically turned into 2 apartments, one up and one down, one up half the house, and then the other one up and down. And so we entered into an agreement to do a buildings assessment, a CAR, a condition assessment report on the buildings, which Strawbery Banke looked at and liked what we did, identifying the features that were going to be maintained and the features that could be changed, with the difference between primary space, which is basically in the front of the house, and secondary space in the back of the house, so you could put kitchens and bathrooms more in those areas. And we just kind of jumped into it. It took about a year and a half, 2 years to do. It was completely self-funded.
You obviously have expertise because of your business and your crews, but so
yes, yeah. So it got accomplished and got done, and it should serve well when we turn the building back to Strawbery Banke. We have the building gets checked every year to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do.
By Strawbery Banke staff, yeah.
It seems to work well, and it should work well with them in the future. Once we leave, they'll have 2 apartments they can rent and bring in money for Strawbery Banke.
How long is the lease for you?
It's a long-term lease. Just leave it at that. It's like
okay.
25
more
years.
than 20. Okay, good.
Yeah.
We'll come back to some of that nitty-gritty later, but and it's happening in other buildings around you and seems pretty successful. It's obviously a strong market there in Portsmouth, so we'll talk a little bit about that later. How can this kind of model work in some place that isn't Portsmouth or Windham? Yeah. Our third is we're turning to Rebecca Mitchell. Becky, you want to introduce yourself a little bit in this project, please?
Yes, certainly. I'm a long-term member of the Stratham Heritage Commission and past chair. And like the other examples you've heard about, this started not as much about as an unloading project, but an acquiring project. The Bartlett Cushman house sits on 2 acres that is adjacent to our town municipal center. The family that had owned it since the 1920s, they wanted to unload it. And we'd been keeping our eye on it for some time, knowing that it was up for sale. And it turned out that working with the chair of the select board, we combined forces on this. And it was this is typical of a lot of these unloading and saving projects, that people will come to it with different priorities. The chair of the select board was interested in selling this from the perspective of a land buy with the bonus of preserving an old building. But of course, for the Heritage Commission, we saw it as preserving an old a wonderful house with a town-sized barn attached and sitting on its original land. So its context was totally intact. So at the beginning, then we worked with sort of rather silently with the select board chair, because he had to convince his fellow board members that this was something that they should pursue. And then he had to enter into negotiations with the owners. But we used that period of time to really get up to speed on knowing the building, making sure we knew the history of it, could help to describe it to people, say why it was important, get the story straight. And I think it was a New Year's Eve, I learned that the select board had finally come to an agreement for a purchase with the owners. And then we really went into high gear in terms of how we're going to use this building, save it, in a sense, unload it. I don't know, Jennifer, you want me to stop here, or I could go ahead with talking about what steps were done next?
Yeah. Let's turn back and hold on to that for a little bit later, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, Becky, you just talked a little bit about the different forces and the balancing act of how to move forward with one of these. I don't know if, so you talked a little bit about that. Betty, I know we actually went through a formal process with your group, that ad hoc group focused on Campbell Farm, to balance things out. So related to preservation, related to use, you want to just talk a little bit about that, or anybody else on the panel want to jump in about that? Seems important to avoid big missteps, to sort of try to get everybody on the same page about what are the big principles we want to move forward with.
Yeah, and it was very important for the Heritage Commission. Our ultimate success was that we were really fully informed in terms of understanding the condition of the building. Steve Bedard was helpful with that. But also doing all the research. I spent hours on microfilm in the Bartlett family papers, the Library of Congress, so I could really tell a good human scale story about the building, which was a help. And another kind of quirky thing is that you should pay attention to how things are perceived by the populace in the town, or the relevant population. Because I began to hear rumors that, oh, well, this is just going to benefit the Cushman family. And so I immediately, we said, okay, this is not the Cushman house. This is the Bartlett Cushman house. And this was from a grandson of Josiah Bartlett, who many of you know was one of New Hampshire's founding fathers. So we began to really stress that aspect of it. It's just kind of an interesting PR quirk, but
Yeah,
need to,
yeah,
you
yeah,
do
yeah.
need to watch out for any kind of little pitfalls like that.
Right, and get people
Thing-
on board on the same front, and maybe, Tom, if you want to say something at this about what ended up happening or what you're working on at Campbell Farm as it kind of relates to this balancing act of what's a good fit for the community. I know we've shared things like related to how much of a property should be preserved, have a guideline about that, and obviously as the panelists have said, understanding your building is critical to helping you make that decision. What kind of uses, what's your first choice, second choice, what doesn't feel comfortable beyond zoning and what's allowed, what's a good fit for the community as you're trying to build momentum for one of these projects. And the financial part in terms of where the financial burden lies is obviously a big thing to relate to in this kind of topic. Is this something that's going to be all privately fundraised for? Is there a town or the current property owner's commitment? How do you find that balance in all of this? So no, Tom, if you want to jump in, Andrew, if you have anything to say on that sort of topic or question about how to think about how to move forward and get your stakeholders on board. I mean, we didn't really touch on it yet, but a lot of these are very sensitive transitions, right? People are used to a property being in certain hands and used a certain way for years and years and years. So making a change can be hard both for the people in charge as well as the community around it.
Touching on what Becky said, public opinion, in my opinion, is of utmost importance. Maybe not everybody would agree, but we feel like sharing our projects with the public is one of our top priorities. In the last 4 years, we've hosted at least 2 open houses a year to bring the public in, to show them what we're doing. My view is if they know what we're doing, then they can't speculate about what we're doing. And we're proud of our work, so we want to share it. And at all stages, we'll bring people in when we're in the middle of a project. We'll clean it up, make it safe, and then bring the people in. Talking about what you mentioned on priorities, our mission is to restore the exterior of every property that we get. Now, there's not always a consensus on what that restoration is. Some people want to freeze a house in time exactly where it is today. Other people want to bring it back to a more contiguous vision of what the house was intended to be when it was built. Every project's different. At Campbell Farm, we had some historic photographs, so we knew what the facade looked like. And if you can bring up that slide, the front porch was missing from the house, but we had historic photographs of what that porch looked like. Quick side note, interestingly enough, our architect drew up the replacement porch, and when we went to go build it, we stripped the siding off of the front of the house to marry up the new porch, and didn't the lines from the original porch match the new design exactly? And we didn't anticipate uncovering that evidence. But we did, and it was a perfect match for what was there before. So our goal was to bring it back to what it would have been. And on the interior, our goal is always to make a property suited for modern use, because our tagline on every project we do is the best way to save a house is to use it.
Yeah, that's a big theme in all of this, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
And people don't know you have a small business.
Sorry?
I just wanted to introduce the fact that, make sure people knew that this is what you do for a living. These small community-minded preservation projects in Massachusetts as well as in New Hampshire.
Yes.
So, and tell us what the use of the Campbell Farm is and will be, just because we never finished that part of the story.
It is we're turning it into a 2-family residential. There'll be 2 rental units in the house. We actually had to go to town meeting, as Betty mentioned, to get that use approved. Our major argument was that 2 factions of the Campbell family lived in the house at the same time, and there had been 2 kitchens at one time. So the house was effectively split in two as it was historically. So that was one of our major arguments for bringing it back to that.
And that use was something, Betty, that you anticipated from the beginning was compatible, was part of what the town wanted, what your ad hoc group and what town voters wanted. Is that true?
Yeah, the goal was to have the building used because
Yep.
otherwise it was gonna go to pot real fast. And it was going to pot in some ways. And it's zoned for residential, and when you have a town property that is being privately used, it has to conform to zoning. So that's why we had to go through the hoops to get the approval to have it be the two-family or duplex kind of house. And the requirement in the beginning was that the conservator under the preservation lease was going to live there, and then we eventually got rid of that requirement, but actually Tom is still living there at the moment, but you know, that may change before the end of the 20-year lease. And under that lease, there are specific things that had to be preserved. You can't see from the photos, but those windows are the original wavy antique glass, and there's a stairway and various other items that were required to stay, but not the entire interior of the house, because if it was to be a museum and maintain the tapestry, silk carpeting, and so forth in the parlor, it wasn't going to be useful, and you couldn't really have it be an economically viable house for somebody to live in.
Part of the balancing act and setting out those terms at the beginning, if you can, just so they're not part of the
Right.
active negotiations.
I
But
also add, I just wanted to add real quickly, our priority as a company is, no matter what the use is, that the property remains looking like the use that was originally intended. So even though we're turning this into a 2-unit, the facade of the house has not changed. We haven't added a new entrance on the front of the house. We are adding a complementary entrance on the side that ties in architecturally, but the goal is to keep it looking from the street as it did originally.
Yeah.
No matter the use.
I just wanted to add that the development of an easement, which we did working with the Preservation Alliance, which was extremely helpful, was really part of our strategy, because from the Heritage Commission standpoint, because it gave us, again, more information that we could use and to use to show that it would be possible to balance preserving the character defining features, at the same time making it adaptable enough for a variety of uses, whether for a professional office, which was an allowed use in that area, or even into a 2-family dwelling. We explored that. So all of that really, you know, having the easement in the development stages really helped. But we were, sorry, we were really thrown a curveball when the select board changed. We had a bunch of new selectmen to deal with, and they wanted to, their goal was to make every town-owned property pay for itself. Well, clearly the Bartlett Cushman wasn't paying anybody anything. It was just sitting vacant. So, but we've figured out a way to work with this. We had to be adaptable and say, okay, well, maybe the town could carve off, we'd go along with the town carving off some land, but there would be enough land around the house to still make it a viable property. And it was helpful that we were flexible in that way, and the select board felt that they could work with us. And so it ultimately had a happy ending. But you do have to think clearly about what you want, define the boundaries, and stick to your guns. They really wanted us to kind of water down the easement, and we did not. And we kept going. I kind of put my fingers in my ears, and we just pressed forward, and the town ended up getting 3 proposals from buyers, and 2 of them said, oh, well, that easement's fine. That's all the kinds of things we'd be interested in doing anyway. So they rejected, they rejected the one that was going to add unsympathetic stuff to the property, and went with one of the other buyers who's turning it into a private home.
Great success story. Yeah. And that whole issue of how much land and trying to think ahead to what's next as you maybe add protections or find a new user, I think is essential. You know, Andrew was talking about old one-room schoolhouses and other properties that might need to leave one set of owners and head for another use, a new ownership, a new investment. And if the site is so small and it's lacking septic or parking, or I don't know, it's another thing to have to solve, right? And don't forget to leave yourself the flexibility in terms of the parcel size or finding an adjacent parcel or something like that. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit, Andrew? I teed you up before and then I kept going. I don't know if you want to say anything now or later.
I think the only thing I can say is if folks have questions, type it in the chat and you can direct it to me, and then I can forward them to the group.
Or just jump in. Yeah, that's great. We want to, as part of this was to give you some general ideas, but also try to answer as many specific questions as possible. Becky, you talked about understanding your building and doing a building assessment as part of the tools you were pulling together. You talked about using the preservation easement as your way to ensure the protections that you wanted after you had found a new owner. Anything else that you generated that you think helped make your parcel more attractive, your property more attractive?
One of the things that we did is that we got it listed to the National Register. And of course, you have to always explain to people that that does not prevent a building being demolished, but it does add some protections. For instance, this property is on a state owned highway on a corner. And so if the state ever wants to put, say, a signal there, they're going to have to make sure that it doesn't impact this property, or if it is, it's mitigated in some way. So think about getting either a state or national register listing. For one thing, the whole process helps you to define what's important about that property and gets you kind of on the right path. And it's also terrific public relations. And we just gave a lot of public programs. Others have mentioned doing tours through it. We did that also. And also, I mean, just setting up every election day, the Heritage Commission would set up a table in the lobby with any of our publications and presentations, posters, you know, all that kind of stuff, so that people could drop by and ask questions. But you just have to, whatever works in your town might be different what worked in our town, but
eating the drum of communications. Yeah, you did measure drawings too, I think, as well.
We did, and now, that was probably 15 or more years ago. But now doing measured drawings is so much simpler with the technology involved. The lasers and cameras and all kinds of things can produce good or reasonably good, not buildable, but good floor plans, so that people can understand, or potential buyers can understand the building and how spaces could be used or combined. And also just so that, you know, like we knew in talking with the select board that we have to say, look, we don't want you to move this wall because it would affect this other place, or we just want to make sure everybody was talking about the same place in the building. And having that graphic is immensely helpful for marketing and just for keeping the team understanding what's going on.
In line with what Becky was saying, most of the properties that we've done did not have a register listing when we purchased them. So being on the receiving end, we've kind of decided that it's part of our process to get these properties listed on the register, even though they're already done. I'm assuming everybody watching this today is like-minded in wanting to preserve these properties. So if you're on the receiving end of one, we consider it part of our process and our responsibility to, one, place an easement on it if there wasn't one already, and two, to get it listed on the register. And the other thing we do, talking about measured drawings, is we put together kind of an archival package on every property, which consists of, well, thousands of photographs, video walkthroughs, and we do 3 sets of drawings on every property. One set of drawings as we believe it was when it was first constructed. Subsequent sets if there were modifications over the years. Then we do a second set as we found the property when we received it. And then a third set as complete if there were modifications. Something else we do is we annotate on those drawings any discoveries that we've made that may not be evident to somebody just looking at the property. Quick example, when we were stripping the paint on Campbell Farm, we uncovered a German woodwright numbering system on all the windows. Now, once the paint was back on, that was gone from view. So we photographed all of the carved numbers. We annotated their location on all the drawings, and then we painted the house. And now, until somebody strips it again in 100 years, you won't see those, but they have been recorded. And any other discovery we've made on, when we took down a wall or took down plaster, we've annotated so that there's a historic record. And it's our plan on every property to put this entire archival set into a lockbox and put it inside a wall. And then to give a set to the local, whoever the appropriate agency is, whether it's the museum, historical society, but a set that's off-site, and then to save a digital version of everything that we've done online.
What a great gift. That's wonderful. There's a hand up. Mr. Ambrosi, is that the
That is
way to say
correct.
your name?
Thank
Sorry.
you. On the theme, I love the theme that the best way to preserve a building is to use the building. And one thing that makes a building usable is that it's energy efficient. And so I'd be curious to hear from the panelists about as you're restoring these buildings, improving their energy efficiency, because 200-year-old building is typically pretty leaky. And in specifics, the windows seem to be probably one of the more difficult things if you want to maintain that original glass, obviously single paned, and you're trying to maintain the look of the
Oh,
exterior.
that's great. Right.
Tell me
So
more
these
about
buildings
that.
are only gonna, attract viable new business models, hopefully. So Steve, do you want to take a crack at that first in terms of adding energy efficiency? And then Tom, I know we all care a lot about this topic, but let's do Steve, then Tom on this topic.
So basically, on all of these projects, you want to be using the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines for rehabilitation. And in those guidelines, they have preservation briefs on how to upgrade your building energy-wise. They always talk about in those energy briefs concerning doing the cap, insulating the cap between the finished area and the attic floor. Also high quality storm, having the wooden windows redone, reglazed, weather stripped properly, and then with a high quality storm window on the outside, which we now know is the same R value as any of the modern windows that are out there and will last more than the 20-year manufacturer's warranty on a modern window. So those are the 3 areas where they really recommend you do work. Once you get past that, when you start talking about insulating exterior walls, it's an issue about whether you can how to get at them and how much historic fabric you're going to destroy to get at them, whether you would get at them from the outside or you get at them from the inside of the building. So those are the basics when it comes to energy efficiency. You always want to tighten up your doors, weather strip properly, things like that. Those are the basic areas that they want you to provide better energy efficiency, as well as if you have a heating system. Let's say you have a warm air furnace system, and you just seal the ductwork alone with a mastic or with tape, you're going to save between 15 and 25% on your energy bill. If you are to insulate the ductwork also from the outside, you're going to increase
know
your
what to
energy
tell you.
efficiency by another 15 to 25%.
That's great, Steve. And we have a bunch of information about that we can, we're happy to send your way. Tom, did you have anything to add to Steve's pretty comprehensive list, practical list?
He's pretty much got it. The one thing I was going to mention is that we have gotten in the habit of using high density cellulose, especially with the irregularly shaped cavities in all of these houses, where if you're opening up a space and you have the luxury to fully insulate from the inside, bats don't fit very well. So we have gotten in the habit of using a high density cellulose, which packs every nook and cranny. And I can say we did that here at Campbell Farm, and we went through last winter without central heat in part of the property because we're still in transition, and we kept those spaces very comfortably heated with a small space heater, even though the windows are still the original windows without storms. So that high density cellulose insulation did an amazing job. And it doesn't compromise the historic integrity of the building because it's not bonding to anything. So if you ever need to remove it, you can take it back out.
And let's talk about money. And Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, there's just one question that's been in the chat for a while.
Oh, sorry.
Wayne asks how a preservation easement might be an impediment to a sale.
It could be, yeah. So, right, we're all about trying to find the balance that will allow a property to successfully transition and then be viable over time. I think, balance has been a big word today, and I think an easement creation has that word associated with it again. If you would, an easement is individually customized and protects certain features. And certainly if you restrict it too much, you might be setting yourself up for failure for the building. So
a good relevant example.
We have an easement on a church in Portsmouth, where in that setting, we think that the property, there's a protection on the sanctuary space because of its significance as an important Black church. There's a little wiggle room in there where it could be condominiumized one day. So that's an example of thinking ahead to the market for a property and making a decision about how restrictive to be. So you're making choices about what's protected and thinking about how that would or wouldn't allow certain uses into the future. So
a really quick example. Yeah, a really quick example on that. We recently did a 1735 house in Drake, Massachusetts. And when we first stumbled onto the property, they were talking about putting a full restriction, interior, exterior, virtually every surface of the house could not be touched. What happened was they had an analysis done of the house. And of course, the analysis was done from a preservation standpoint, as you would expect. But they took it literally and transferred that into a draft for a restriction. And when we sat down with them, we said, under this restriction, nobody can do anything with the property, including us. And we'd love to preserve it. What's ironic is in the final version of the restriction, they got rid of the bulk of the interior restriction. Some key elements were listed, but it was exterior and some key elements on the interior. Well, when we got in to do the restoration, we discovered very quickly that many of these surfaces that had been identified weren't the least bit historic. Some of these surfaces were from the 70s, and we found dates to back that up. So
it's being unnecessarily restrictive, kind of for the wrong reasons.
Right, and I think there are appropriate places for a full restriction. If something is in its original condition and has a level of historic significance. But if it prohibits it from continued use, then what's the point? It defeats the purpose.
Right. So I think, I mean, in all of these, talking to advisors or experts is a good idea. If, Wayne, I don't know if we answered your question, but if it was me, I would bring into the conversation, if you're thinking about an easement, somebody who knows the local markets, who isn't afraid of the idea of some protections, you know, who sort of gets the easement concept, which we always say kind of narrows the market of who's interested. But if you're interested in preservation, it's probably narrowing it in a good way. But how to find that balance so you're maintaining viability of the property, you're allowing for growth and change or reuse without unnecessarily, while protecting what's really important about it. We've started now and then using term easements, so something's protected for a certain term. So you're committing to that protection for a certain term, but afterwards there's flexibility. So that's just another concept to keep in mind too. If you're worried about the long-term protection, or the easement holders worried about the long-term protection, that can be a useful idea.
Got another question. What happens when the length of the lease is up? What's the next step?
Good question. Betty, do you want
I
to,
move out. Basically, I move out.
Go
When
ahead.
my lease
Steve.
is up, and when Tom's lease is up, we move out.
Is there a renewal provision that relates to what the community wanted in the first place?
If the community wanted that, see, that's why it's really important. I'm hoping we're gonna get a chance to talk about this, is how to protect the group and the resource at the same time going forward. So yes, if they could, that could be something in the renewable, could be in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of Campbell Farm, it's a 20-year lease, and at the end of it, that is it. Now, Tom may want to take some actions in the meantime, but it would necessitate a voted town meeting again.
And at some point, we may come forward with a proposal to present to the town. That remains to be seen. We'll see.
And you could combine these things, like I know you could do a lease with certain sort of performance requirements, which all these, Steve referred to it, Tom referred to it. So there's some oversight, but not a heavy legal well, a different kind of legal responsibility for a lease. And then at the end of that lease, you might decide to sell the property with an easement on it. So you
Yeah,
could
we had
use some of these tools in combination, is my point.
most of the ones I've been involved with have a very strict timeline and are completion dates that things have to be done. You certainly don't want to turn your building, your historic building, over to someone assuming that they're going to do the work, and it's a 20-year lease and it takes them 18 years to do it. It doesn't work out that well.
Yeah.
So that's something that's very important to do also. And
And we
I think
can-
the easement holder, having an easement holder like Preservation Alliance does. I've been involved with a couple of them on a year-to-year basis, and you check to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, or then you have to write a letter.
Or get lawyers involved if they're not doing what
Mhm.
they said they should be doing.
If there's an RFP process, and even if it's a sale, I would recommend there being some kind of performance provision attached to that sale, and then attach that to the deed. A good example is the property that we did in Drake. We picked it up far, far below market value because of what we said we would do. When it came to the closing, we fully expected to have that plan attached to the deed as a provision, and they opted not to because they didn't want to deal with it. And in my opinion, that's a very irresponsible way to transfer a historic asset. They should have expected performance out of us. Now, they're getting performance, but there was no way to hold us to that. And I think the responsible way, especially if you're selling it below value with the expectation that a plan is going to be followed through, there should be some kind of a performance agreement attached to it. And I'm saying that as somebody on the receiving end. We were expecting it. It would have been reasonable.
Right. I just wanted to make sure we covered good communication before our hour is up, and I think you've heard it sprinkled through the whole conversation. Tom and Becky from different sides of the equation talking about open houses and other ways just to kind of keep a steady drumbeat of positive communication and going about the process and the property and the progress. I know we've talked about having, I mean, it's such a simple point, but I think it's worth saying about having a really strong point person and having the right kind of committee. which I feel like happened in all of these situations.
One thing
Anybody
I'd like to add is that once this is all over, and if you're in a heritage commission or some other, or even an ad hoc committee, follow through, keep track of these people, the people or entities that are in that building, be friendly, praise them when it's praiseworthy, or offer to provide some guidance if it looks like they're straying. Just keep friendly, and it will pay off.
Yeah.
On the topic of communication, just to circle back real quick, when Betty and I first met, we didn't know each other. I got her contact through a newspaper article that I had seen on Campbell Farm. And the first question that I asked her was, are you serious about this? Because we had just had 2 experiences. We went through this big, long process. And in the end, we determined that the people holding the property didn't really want to do anything. They were more curious. So I said to Betty, are you serious about this? And she said, when can you come up? And that's how it all started. And to their credit, the ad hoc committee that handled all of it were very thorough. They stuck to their word. I think I tried to compliment them leaving every meeting we attended, because it's fairly unusual to find a group that has their stuff together and follows through. It took us a whole year, or nearly a year, to get through the process, but it was a pleasure. And I think I would recommend to anybody on that side of it, make sure you have your ducks in order, make sure you know what your goal is. Because if you go into a conversation with somebody who's well-meaning and capable, you may lose them if you don't have your act together. So before you pursue the public to find a solution, know really what your end goal is and follow through.
Yeah. And I would say even before that, if you're a group property owner considering one of these kinds of processes, don't wait too long. I think we see that over and over again, that it's a tough decision to make internally and because of outside forces, and groups put it off and the buildings deteriorate, and finding a new investor user just gets more and more difficult. So don't wait. I wanted to invite the panel to anybody wanted to make a closing point or two. You don't have to, but Andrew, you look like you wanted to say something. Have we answered the questions?
There's one more question, which
Okay.
should be quick. In the case of like Strawbery Bank, there's someone who's monitoring the work and making sure it meets the standards. In the case of a building that has an easement, there's someone monitoring it. But in maybe Windham's case, who's ensuring that the standards are actually met and the town is getting their kind of value for the lease?
The town is actually contracted with the Preservation Alliance, actually. That is correct, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was Steve?
Okay.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah,
idea
Steve-
was,
Steve has been
Steve,
working
that
with
we
us.
needed an expert because you didn't have the capacity locally, right? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and I must say that the town has been very lax in doing it formally, and I think Steve came down one time, but hasn't been twice.
Came down twice. I think
Yeah.
we did come down twice, but Tom seems to be heading in the right direction, so we didn't want to burden the town with additional costs.
Yeah, and I think the open houses have led to the people that matter having their concerns taken care of, because you can go into the open house and say, oh yeah, there is still progress. And even if he wasn't completing all of the business, if the house is being preserved and it's not costing anything to the town, and there's no problems, it's almost like, oh,
Right.
let's not wake up the sleeping dog. That's part of my thought here too, in whether or not we get any formalities on whether or not it meets a timeline. No, there's progress. And also what we tried in the timing was to say by X year you must have invested in sweat equity and actual outlay X amount, and by that year, and by that year, and by that year. And if he hasn't finished the other side of the complex and hasn't gotten the income, it's not a problem to the town. But our asset is protected by looking at it in that respect.
I might disagree with you a little bit on that one, Betty. But that's okay.
Which,
I think you do. I think that's a nice goal to achieve. But I think with COVID, we gave a lot of flexibility to people.
oh,
Getting
yes.
timelines done. But I
Yeah,
think you have to have really good timelines. Otherwise, things can happen to people, and then they don't get met, and it seems like somebody's gotten a deal, and yet they didn't finish what they were supposed to do. So,
yep,
I think you have to have a good blend.
indeed,
Good.
with flexibility in it.
A little bit of
Yeah.
flexibility is fine.
Definitions with flexibility.
Any burning comments from the panel before I wrap up?
Start looking ahead.
I wanted to
Good advice.
congratulate Betty. Betty, I'm sorry, Becky, because not only do they have one project, they have two projects that they've done in town that have been successful.
3.
Three. I'm sorry, 3. Yeah, you're right, 3. I forgot about the third one. So that's great, and she set a great example for everyone in the state to continue on and improve things.
Well, some of our successes are due to help from good people like you.
Well, no, it's not.
Also
Well,
who inspire us. Thank you.
Well,
But
you
we
all
are-
inspire us. Yeah. Go
We
ahead.
are looking ahead and keeping track of potential things that could arise. And that's the other thought I want to leave with people, is that too often we get blindsided, and whatever steps you can take to start thinking ahead will pay off.
Yeah. Here. Well, thanks for all
Hey,
that.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
just
Betty.
say, I don't know about the others, but I like talking about this stuff. So if people have questions, some of the visitors have questions in the future, you have my contact information, and New Hampshire Preservation always does too. And I think most of us who are doing this kind of stuff have more than one project we're going on. I already talked to Tom and Andrew about it, other issues. Get in
That's
touch.
great. That helps get everything done, doesn't it? So we're going to share the contact information of the panelists with their blessing. I know Tom's looking for new projects in New Hampshire. I think I'm allowed to say that if they're good projects. We have things like model RFPs, and we've been through the process that some of these have in terms of vetting folks. So, lean on us for that. Or if you have great models you want to share, we'd always love to have more. Keep on keeping on what you're doing. I know from who's in this Zoom that a lot of you are advancing really, really important projects. So thank you for all you're doing. We're going to send a follow-up email with quick survey, a thank you to everybody who's a supporter, and a request to join us so we can do more of these if you're not already, and a couple of resource thoughts. So stay tuned, and there's a bunch of additional programs coming up this fall. We'll have a link to that, and it's all on our website as well. So thanks again to the panel and to all of you for doing what you're doing, and good luck.